As a brand, Seiko have pretty much everything covered. Whether it is price or style, they go all the way from the budget Seiko 5 up to Grand Seiko and Creedor, and have different types of watches ranging from dress to dive and everything in between. Today's watch comes from their Prospex line, and for me, is probably the best field watch that the brand offers. It ticks a lot of the same boxes the Tudor Black Bay 36 does, but does it do enough to scratch the itch? Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we're looking at a cracker of a watch from Seiko. It's a watch I spent a long time looking at after it was released, before ultimately adding it to my collection. It took all of the elements I liked from another cult classic Seiko watch, and got rid of the ones I didn't. This is the Seiko Baby Alpinist SPB157. That's a bit of a strange nickname if you don't know much about the watch. It sounds a bit silly with baby in there. But it's not referring to the smaller than average size of the watch or the target audience. This is called the Baby Alpinist because it's based on the cult classic watch from Seiko, the Alpinist, and the most popular one in recent times, the SPB157. It's not just a shrunk down version of that watch though. For this one they ditched the inner rotating ring and accompanying crown at 4 o'clock. They also made some slight changes to the minute track, but those alternating hours with numerals for the evens stayed, and give the watch that distinctive alpinist look. Also carried over from the original are the cathedral hands, which almost look too delicate to be on such a rugged watch. Okay, so this watch can trace its origin back to Seiko's full-sized range of alpinist watches, but by no means does that take anything away from this one. It's very much its own watch and stands proud alongside them. Personally, it is far and away my favourite alpinist watch from Seiko. Released towards the end of 2020, the Baby Alpinist line features 3 main colour variations, this blue one, a charcoal grey one, and of course a green one harking back to the original inspiration. In addition to these, there is also a sunburst grey gilt dial version, as well as a two-tone with a green dial. However, those two are far less common. Upon release, they had an RRP right around $700 US. But, for your money, you got some decent specs including a domed sapphire crystal and updated 6R35 movement. We'll come back to those later though. At this price it has some stiff competition from the likes of the Hamilton Khaki Field, so it needs to offer something a bit different. And in my opinion it does, in the form of an absolutely gorgeous granular textured dial. If we know anything by now on this channel, it's that Seiko really know how to do a dial under $1,000. These are no exception. All 3 of those main colour dials, blue, green and grey, have this subtle texture to them that plays with the light in a way that can almost sparkle at times. In a way, it adds to the tooliness of the watch by introducing some texture rather than a perfectly flat surface. This texture is combined with a subtle fume effect around the edges of the dial where it fades to a darker blue and eventually black at the minute track. It's not too sudden a change in colour, where it could have easily looked cheap or cheesy. It lets the dial seem to sink further into the case around the edges, and let the colour at the centre punch through. That alone is probably my favourite part of the entire watch. Seiko has combined this with the iconic Alpinist dial furniture in the form of numerals on the even hours and slim triangles pointing inwards for the odds. They are just printed on, as is everything else on the dial bar the applied Seiko logo. Along with these, the minute track is printed with solid rectangles at every hour. Other printing on the dial includes the Prospex X, which I could take or leave, and automatic 20 bar underneath. We can round out the printing on the dial with a slender frame around the date complication at 3, which has not completely colour matched the date wheel in black. All of this printing is done in a slightly creamy yellow colour rather than crisp white. Some people might argue that it's fauxtina, but I think it really brings the dial together. Those 3 elements, the texture, fume and cream printing, give the watch a bit of a vintage feel, and I really like that about it. Where I feel Seiko has fallen short on this dial is more like a missed opportunity than anything else. Inside those rectangles in the minute track are small dots of lume. I think if Seiko had loomed the actual hour markers, the effect when the lights go out would have been really striking. But I suppose that would have taken away a bit from the vintage aesthetic that the watch generally has. Now I'm just imagining a dial like this, where all of the printing of the hours and minute track was loomed. That would be something. Earlier I mentioned the hands on this watch were carried over from the full-sized Alpinist. This particular style of hands is called cathedral hands. These can actually trace their origins back much further than the Alpinist to field watches from World War I. I think the name cathedral came from that divided section in the hour hand, which evokes images of the stained glass windows you'd see on a cathedral. They might stand out a bit compared to many other hand designs on modern watches, but I think they give the watch a bit of elegance. The other reason they stand out is because these are a crisp white colour where the loom is filled in, which contrasts against the printing on the dial. Another missed opportunity here. The only other pop of colour on the watch comes from a barely visible red needle tip to the second hand. Covering all of that is a beautifully domed piece of sapphire crystal. The doming is very subtle and doesn't extend the height of the watch very much, but just enough to be noticeable. This is pretty much my preferred type of crystal for any watch. It adds an extra little feeling of refinement to the watch. Turning it to an extreme angle, we can see some distortion, which means that it's single rather than double domed. That means the top surface is domed, but the bottom surface of the crystal is flat, which creates this distortion. It also has a blue anti-reflective coating applied to it, which cuts down on glare and reflections. It does a pretty good job here, and I think on this blue version Seiko can get away with it, but I wonder if blue AR coating looks a bit out of place on the grey or green version. Moving a bit further out, let's take a look at the case. I've been tending to gravitate towards smaller watches, so the set of measurements on this case are just about ideal for me. Looking at the overall diameter, it's officially listed at 38mm, but I measured 37.7. Lug to lug is a very compact 46mm, and height extends to 13.1mm thanks to the doming of the crystal. On wrist though, the watch doesn't feel nearly that tall, and to be honest, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I actually like a bit of junk in the trunk when it comes to my watches. Around 11 to 13.5mm thicknesses are fine by me, not just for dive watches. Something like the Black Bay Pro at 14.6mm might be pushing it a bit though. I think a big part of why this watch can pull off that height is the short lug to lug as well as the curve of the lugs as they leave the case. Looking from the side here, we can see that they start to curve down quite sharply by the time we get to the lug tips. From this angle, we also get a look at the high polished finish on the sides of the case. Back around front, there is more polish in the form of a smooth bezel and those little slivers on the insides of the lugs. The tops of the lugs are a bit more sensible with their vertical brushing. The watch is a bit more shiny and plays with the light more than I was expecting, but I've come to like that. The bezel especially catches lots of different reflections in natural light, and the watch is small enough that even with the polish, it doesn't look over the top. We're arriving at another missed opportunity here on this side of the watch with the unsigned crown. Especially at this price point, there isn't really any reason that Seiko can't be including this. It's just about the right size for the watch however, and features some chunky machining to help you get a good grip on it. You'll need to, since the crown screws down, as does the caseback, giving the watch that 20 bar water resistance advertised on the front of the dial. That caseback is also a display caseback, so from here we can get a good look at the movement beating away inside. That movement is the 6R35 movement, which updates the previous 6R15 movement that came in many mid-range Seiko watches. It shares many similar characteristics, including that 3Hz beat rate, but has an increased power reserve up to 70 hours, which is a nice little bump. The rotor has a little bit of decoration in the form of striping, but, much like on my Grand Seiko, the view of the movement is obscured by some big, unnecessary printing on the glass. At the very least, it's nice to get a little peek inside from the back here. The other aspect of the watch I haven't covered yet is the strap. This blue version comes with a colour-matched 20mm leather strap that overall is pretty plain. It also comes installed reversed with the long end of the strap on the top side of the watch. This is to create a cleaner look from the outside of the wrist, as well as make the folding of the deployant clasp feel more natural. However, I switched it out pretty quick for a few other straps that I think look much better on the watch, and which we'll see soon. The green version of this watch, the SPB157, comes on a bracelet, which I would normally much prefer, and is only $25 more at $725. I really wish there was an option to buy each of the colours on a bracelet rather than limiting it to the green one. Trying to buy the bracelet directly from Seiko will cost you much more than $25, I can tell you that. I did have the bracelet from my Orient chicane fitted to this watch for a while, and didn't mind how that looked too. Okay, it's time for everyone's favourite part of the video, and by everyone I mean me. It's my favourite part of the video, because I actually get to wear the watch. Here it is on the stock leather strap, and it looks fine, but I think in this case, a contrasting strap works much better. As I turn my wrist though, you can see how that polishing on the case catches the light and reflects it really nicely. Changing it over to this brown leather strap, and there is an immediate improvement. Blue dials with brown straps are usually a safe bet, and in this case it definitely works well. Another strap I've enjoyed wearing it on is this grey one with cream coloured contrast stitching. The grey and blue colours pair quite well together, and the stitching on the strap picks out the printing on the dial too. This setup is how I've worn the watch most. More recently though, I've also been enjoying it on this blue sailcloth strap from Artem Straps that I think matches the blue of the dial really well without looking cheesy. There's a phrase I've repeated a few times in this video, isn't there? Missed opportunities. There were a few on the dial, with the application of lume and the colour of the hands, as well as the crown not being signed, the printing obscuring the caseback, and the lack of bracelet on any model other than the green dial. It might sound, with all of those complaints, that I'm a bit unhappy with the watch. Well, I'm happy to say that I'm not. In fact, I really like it. Originally I had wanted to get the grey dial version, but this one came up for sale at a good price and I jumped on it. I already have too many blue watches in the collection, but at this point, what's one more? Especially when the rest of the watch looks, wears and feels this good. If you're at all inclined towards smaller watches and want a robust watch with more than enough water resistance, a reliable movement and a fantastic little design, you'd be hard pressed to go wrong with one of these, especially once you get it outside in natural light. What do you think about this watch? Do you prefer this or the original full-sized Alpinist? Would you add one of these to your collection? Is there a better option for the field everyday watch at this price point? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.